5 minutes, I'd rather not be on the internet.
Right. So I was just waiting. So I'm taking it live now, but let's just wait a second until we go like officially, until we kick started.
Yeah.
Let it process this thing. But it's going live.
Yeah, I see the live.
All right. And also I'm gonna share this with you, Ian, because you asked me.
Oh, the
But
YouTube link?
yeah, but yeah,
Yeah, I got it.
we're live on YouTube now. So I'm gonna put in the movie club. I'm gonna send it to you, Ian. And today we're gonna talk about the Mandalorian.
Yeah.
But I haven't started recording yet. But
There's like several key things we can really focus on, not just from this episode, but on the show in general. But this episode definitely.
okay,
And
so before we start recording, how do you want to kickstart it?
I guess like since we haven't talked about it yet, how are y'all's thoughts on the show 2 seasons in?
Love it. It's Space Cowboy the drama, and it's fantastic. I love Star Wars Plus. It's a great new streaming service.
Yeah, it's basically what it is at this point.
Right.
I would agree.
And
I love the show. Maybe started a little slow, but you
just
say
okay.
you say it's
I'm gonna
it's space cowboys and space western stuff, and I go further and I'm like, this feels very true to the inspirations behind Star Wars, which is samurai movies, and
Yeah.
there's so much in the Lone Samurai, especially
right,
in Lone Wolf Cub, and
let me just start recording here. All right, so
oh
I'm gonna record 3, 2, 1, go, and we're live. So we're gonna talk about the Mandalorian today. Welcome to Talking Movies slash Talking Shows. I'm Bruno. I'm here with Dan and Ian. So Dan, you were telling me, what did you think about the show?
yeah, I love it at this point. It's you know it's space samurai movie. Um, they can true to the original roots of the inspirations of George Lucas, and true also to his desires. He felt Star Wars would be best done in a long TV format. Could really flesh things out a little bit better.
Awesome. What about you, Ian?
Absolutely loved it. I am so excited to see what Disney does with Star Wars going forward, because it filters out the curmudgeons, and I think this really keeps the series fresh and approachable, and I think that's what Star Wars actually needs.
Yeah,
And I think The Mandalorian does a fantastic job of being exciting for newcomers to the franchise, and being gripping and engaging and stimulating for veterans.
Yeah, I also loved it, and yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a great samurai story set in space, but I would add that it's kind of a western as well. So
definitely.
it's yeah, it's a mixture of like a samurai western influences, which is something that we saw in the original Star Wars, because Han Solo was basically a cowboy slash pirate
Mhm.
slash space guy, and then we had bounty hunters like Boba Fett, and but we also obviously had the samurai stuff with the Jedi and all that.
Well, we don't need
So
to get
it's kind
into
of
it,
a
but the
mixture of
western and
both.
the samurai movie have been parallels for
Oh
quite a
yeah, for
while.
sure. Yeah, but there are those two kind of like different influences, right?
Yeah,
Because like aesthetically, especially, they're different, and I don't know. I think it's kind of and the Mandalorian himself, the character, is kind of a mixture of both, because he's a little bit like a cowboy, but he's also like a samurai, like martial
mhm.
artist.
Well, I mean, it goes back to the lone wolf and the cub story. That's where kind of these 2 seasons have been, and it's very
Yeah,
contemplative.
I,
It's
I agree. Talk a little bit about that, Dan, because I think that's a really great point. But not everybody's gonna know what that is. So,
the lone
do
wolf and the
you mind
cub.
setting? Yeah,
I mean,
setting
it's a
like
pretty
telling people.
it's an archetypal story that goes through many films, goes all the way back. I mean, it's the idea that like you have the loner who is unfriendly, who comes out of his shell through caring for a defenseless character, like somebody who needs his care, and that helps him grow and come out of his shell. I mean, all the way to the point that they have an essentially a silent homage to the Return of the Jedi, where let me look on you with my own eyes in this last episode. Like that's something he did purely for the sake of the kid, Grogu. And so like this was these 2 seasons were essentially an entire Lone Wolf and the Cubs story. And it's something that, was given time to breathe, and I'm all here for it.
I thought you were talking actually. I didn't know that Lone Wolf and Cub was actually like an archetype. I thought you were actually mentioning the manga.
Oh, that actually, you're right. It is the manga as well. Man, there's a
Yeah,
lot,
and
there's a lot of layers to it.
I was really excited when you mentioned that because I love that manga. That's my only manga that I actually read or I have read. I used to read as a kid, so absolutely love Lone Wolf and Cub, or the Lone Wolf and the Cub, or whatever it's called. But it's a fantastic manga, and you have this guy. Actually, they made a movie, The Samurai Executioner. I think you
Yeah,
know they talk about it in Kill Bill. I haven't actually seen the movie, which itself is kind of like an American version of a Japanese movie. It's kind of convoluted from the 70s, but basically you have this. I don't know. Have you seen it, Ian? Or have you read the manga?
Which one?
Lone Wolf
Lone
and
Wolf
Cub.
Cub.
No.
It's essentially the Mandalorian. So you have this guy. He's the samurai executioner.
Mhm.
Uh, Basically, he chops heads for his job, for the shogun. And I don't remember exactly because that's like right at the beginning of the story. Something happens, and basically the shogun orders him to commit seppuku, so to kill
Sure.
himself. And I think that's what it is. And then he says he refuses to do it because his family was also going to die in the process, I believe, or they were going to be left without a way of receiving any sort of income. So he basically escapes with his kid, who's a kind of a baby, toddler kind of thing. So he takes his toddler, and his wife dies, but he manages to save his son, and he travels all around Japan, being a gun for hire, or in this case a sword for hire, working as a mercenary. So essentially Mandalorian, but in feudal Japan. And I mean, unless it's a huge coincidence, I think that was the main inspiration for that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think Lone Wolf and Cub had a lot of influence on many things coming after it. It's something that, yeah, I'm kind of actually upset I didn't remember to go directly to that, but that trope I think has permeated a lot, and it's one that has a great way to deliver story because it's a character study. You have to focus on those characters, and so and it's the relationship between the two. And we've now reached the climax of that, I would say. So I'll be curious to see where they go from here. But I think like we should leave the future of the Mandalorian for a later segment of this because I think there's a lot we can talk about where they're going to go from here.
Yeah,
Ian,
absolutely.
your thoughts on overall the structure of the show?
Yeah, I mean, I think the structure of the show is really. I really appreciate that it's just designed for a wide audience.
Yeah.
I think it hits a perfect level of attainability and approachability. Like, I watched season 1 mostly by myself, and there are a few throwbacks to it in season 2, but not so many that watching season 2 on its own becomes an impossible task. Like, if you were to jump in midway in Game of Thrones, you'd just be like, what the hell is going on?
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. And well, I don't want to interrupt you, so but I just want to say that that's a great point that we should touch on later on, the fact that it kind of has a monster of the week kind of structure.
Yeah, I mean, as far as just like its modularity, I think that's what's really going to set it up for success. And I think this is where I diverge from a lot of Star Wars purists and um, just the really dedicated Star Wars fans that get upset at how often the series fails to meet their expectations.
Yeah, I
because
think that well, I mean, it's all part of like, nostalgia can often be a very toxic impulse, borrowing a phrase from the great John Hodgman. Um, but people, I think, have these feelings of how Star Wars is supposed to be, and when at its heart, you know, it's initially whatever George Lucas made it to be, and but there's a whole universe that you can make anything out of, like, you know, and this show has almost seemed to be like a through line for everything because it tied together so many elements from the cartoons, the books, the comics. Like there's so many things that have were wrapped up into this that I was really impressed that they were able to like. There's something for everybody who liked any piece of Star Wars within this.
yeah,
You have
totally.
like I said, the callbacks with Ahsoka and Bo-Katan in this most recent season, which awesome that Bo-Katan got more play in this. I'm thinking she might have a larger role in later seasons. Um, to just the final, not the post credit, but the final scene here and tying
Are
it together.
those Attack of the Clones characters? Because I haven't seen that show.
Uh, so Bo-Katan is in both Clone Wars and Rebels. Same with Ahsoka Tano. Um, and honestly, some of the highlights of the cartoons are the Mandalorian stuff, and so I think the show plays up to the strongest elements that they have been able to add to the lore, and and it does it without being too heavy into the mysticism that people usually associate with Star Wars because there's other elements we can explore. Um, so it's what I appreciate about it is that it ties things while also giving us something refreshing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the tie-in is uh, my favorite party trick of Star Wars in general,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's what makes it satisfying to continue watching the series, because it feels like a return on investment.
Yeah.
Because it really rewards you for knowing more stuff. The more you know, the more excited you are, and I think that's great. I think that's really like one of the core virtues of the franchise in general.
Mm-hmm. Right, like even just down to the small things like Boba Fett's ship Slave One having a mine that comes out and having the exact same effect that it had in
Yeah,
Attack of the Clones. Like, you know,
right. I mean,
it's
even
like
just getting to see it and like the sting at the end where he comes. How do we feel about spoilers? Before I
Spoiler alert. Go ahead.
oh,
put it in the
perfect.
put it in the title.
Yeah,
Make sure when you put it like there will be spoilers.
perfect. So like the sting at the end of episode 2 where Boba Fett comes back and he's at the it looks like the cantina that's on Tatooine
That
where
was it was Jabba the Hutt's palace.
yeah, it's Jabba's palace where he comes back and he murders everybody.
Yeah,
Like great, fantastic, because it ties into episode 6 and you're just like this is insane.
yeah, and
And like it just gets your gears a turning.
like
And then
even
you're
they
like, how did he even get out? But if you've like invested even farther into the Star Wars universe, you know that he had this like telepathic experience with the Sarlacc pit and convinced her to let him out. And he even got captured again by the Sarlacc pit. Like he's escaped twice from that fucking thing.
yeah. When I'll be very curious. People keep saying that, oh man, they're announcing the new Boba Fett show. I'm like, I, I think the next season of The Mandalorian is Boba Fett's season. I think
Yeah,
the first two seasons of this have been Din Djarin's and his story. It's because these are all chapters, they say. So this was the book of Din Djarin, and now we're going to have the book of Boba Fett. And I think I would not be surprised if they continue weaving in Din and Bo-Katan to eventually have a book of Bo-Katan as well. And they could definitely like. I mean, this is why like the Mandalorian can encompass everything. Like this is, and it's and you can and I would say I'm excited for that kind of a show because I feel too many shows center on characters whose stories are pretty much complete, and go on too long after that. So I'm
Mhm.
So
excited to
that's
see.
really that's a really interesting point, because so you're saying that the we're gonna keep having the Mandalorian, but the main character is gonna shift.
Maybe
So now we're gonna follow Boba Fett.
that would be my thought on this, just because like this is coming out at the same time. The Mandalorian supposedly will be out next season as well. Are they
Yeah,
going to have two Mandalorian centered shows at the same time?
I don't think so. So the way I see this is like, I think Grogu or Baby Yoda is like the massive like fan favorite, right? He's like the attention getter, and I think that alone also plants the seeds for all kinds of crazy things. And the fact that we see young Luke Skywalker come back also, like, you could have like 6 seasons in a movie just off of that interaction alone.
Yeah.
Wow,
Which
how amazing was that? That end with Luke Skywalker, I absolutely love that.
does anybody
And it
follow
looked
Mark Hamill on Twitter?
I do.
And that was great. Like, he tweeted yesterday, like, anything good on TV today?
I didn't see that.
and the way they did it, I mean, it looked like Mark Hamill, but I think it was CG. I think it was CGI. I think it was some sort of motion capture thing.
It was definitely the same thing they did with Rogue One, and actually with the Rise of Skywalker, where they had Carrie Fisher in there.
Mhm. With
But
like the extreme CG and like facial recognition technology.
yeah, which is why they didn't use a lot of facial shots, and they
Right.
um, I was it
But
was
still, it's so sick.
it still looked
It was
good.
fantastic. It was so cool.
If Mark Hamill was
I
in,
mean,
I mean, Mark Hamill's in good shape. I'll
Mhm.
say that. But if he was in the same shape as he was now, they might have done actually the other thing that Marvel and Disney have been doing, which is they just de-age an actor. Like in a lot of the Marvel movies, like, hell, Samuel L. Jackson played like a 30 to 40-year-old version of himself in Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
With the de-aging effects. And
yeah, he
I thought
looked good.
they could have pulled that off too, but this one definitely was they had to have an actor stand in for him.
I mean, I still think that's fine. And it's really interesting to talk about like the technical and special effects aspect of the franchise going forward. I think this really sets the stage it really opens up like a whole world of possibilities as far as what can be put back on the table. So we can see like we can see a Harrison Ford deep fake clone thrown into the mix, if you will. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they do it at all, because it sounds like Harrison Ford doesn't want to do anything else anymore. So if he just like signs off on a contract, then you've got another Han Solo spinoff, and who doesn't want that? Because Solo the movie was awesome.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Although I think that we saw Luke Skywalker for just a brief moment, I'm not sure, but I think that would be probably pretty hard to do like on a regular basis. I think I'm guessing that would be like a really expensive thing to do.
It's expensive, and again, this show in particular, you might see Luke show up in the Ahsoka show, just because she's still going to be on her. I feel like this show actually takes place. You've watched Rebels, right, Ian?
I actually haven't watched Rebels. I've watched almost all of the Clone Wars. I don't think I've watched like the final 1 or 2 seasons.
So it's not too much of a spoiler, but the final episode takes place after Return of the Jedi, whereas most of the show takes place within the original Star Wars trilogy. And so there's a time gap. And I feel like this show and the Ahsoka show and everything seems like they're setting in between that. But I am excited for the kind of stories they can tell with all of this. I'm somebody who I enjoy the nostalgia. Like, I'm not gonna lie, when Luke shows up, you see the single X-Wing, I got shivers. I was like, oh, are they doing it? And but I also really
I genuinely did not see it coming.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was like,
I agree. I didn't think it was
Even when it
Luke.
was a single X-wing.
No, my brain just like I didn't think it was possible. I was like, oh, it's gonna be like some kind of Jedi who's
Green
I
lightsaber with a glove.
I didn't think it was possible either,
Did-
man. I had never seen
I
like
didn't notice the
Luke.
glove detail, but like
Yeah.
I was
No,
like,
Yeah,
oh, is it
I was
Ahsoka
like,
coming back?
I
'Cause-
I basically just having like ramping up hype throughout the whole scene. I was like, they're doing it. They're doing it. I mean, I guess I would say
like
like
that
for
scene of Vince
fans,
McMahon freaking out in his chair.
yeah, I would say that that scene is probably what fans have been probably clamoring for because they've been wanting to see a Luke just total decimation. Basically, do the Vader scene from Rogue One where he just went through the hallway, and he basically got his version of that in this. Um, but you know, despite how much I love that, I'm also excited to see more of the kind of like stories they can tell within the realm of these Mandalorians. I mean, I'm curious if we're going to see the glass of Mandalore now at
Oh,
some
I would
point.
love to. I think like Mandalore, the lore, not to tongue twist myself, is one of the most interesting topics in the Star Wars
Right.
fandom that I don't know about. I wish I knew a lot more about Mandalore than I do.
Did you watch the Clone Wars? They did quite a bit in there.
Yeah, I know they do like the whole Mandalore arc. I think they start that more at like season 6 after Darth Maul comes back with the spider legs.
Hmm.
And I think that's like right where I left off. So I've got to go back and like finish off the Clone Wars, which my
And
sister is watching through right now.
finish that and then watch Rebels. Honestly, the cartoons turned Darth Maul into an awesome villain.
Perfect, because he was a total scrub in episode 1.
Right. I would say
Um,
like that would be my
He'll
would have
look
been
really
probably a big missed opportunity is that he should have just been a 3 movie villain there. He was so
the yeah, I mean, the fact that Boba Fett even comes back when that happened, I was like, when they had like Boba Fett's armor, I was just like, oh shit, like
yeah.
now we're getting into some deep lore territory. Like
And then
now we
Timothy
know,
Oliphant in his
yeah,
armor.
now we know for sure that like Boba Fett made it out of the Sarlacc pit. Like I know this was talked about in the comics, but like the cinematic audience gets to see it now.
Yeah.
And then the fact that he comes back looking for his armor, you're like, holy shit. And like I love the allusion to the sub factions amongst the Mandalorians.
Oh, that's great. I can't wait for them to expand on that more too.
Yeah. Hang on. I'm on the Wikipedia right now looking stuff up.
So, yeah, so it's I think it's really interesting how this show, and I was a little bit on the fence about this at first, but how this show apparently is launching like a whole extended Star Wars universe
Mhm.
that we're gonna get lots of different shows and
I want to see just I'm more on board with more shows rather than necessarily more big cinematic movies.
well, I think this was basically this show was Disney Plus selling point, because when
Yeah.
Disney Plus came out, I mean they had a good back library of titles of movies and TV shows, but it's basically stuff that people had watched before. When I got Disney Plus, I mean, I confess that the first thing that I watched was that silly movie with Heath Ledger and that blonde chick.
I think they hate
10
about
Things
you.
I Hate About You.
Yes,
I
exactly.
thought
That
that's a good movie though. Any Heath Ledger movie is a good movie
Yeah.
because he's
It's
so
a good
hot.
movie, but it's a guilty pleasure. Like it's
Don't
a
feel
little bit
guilty about it.
embarrassing.
I mean, it's a well-made, well-acted update of Taming of the Shrew. I mean, it's
I was a little bit embarrassed because I got Disney Plus, and that's what I ended up watching. Other than the Mandalorian. So I mean,
It's fine, man. I won't tell anybody.
yeah. I watched
You're
another
secret
trash
safe
anime
with us.
that I'm
YouTube now knows. So
I love me some trash anime, so
we should have a trash anime podcast at some point.
look,
I don't know if you follow any anime YouTubers. Like I don't know if you follow Giga.
No.
No, I don't follow any anime YouTubers, but
You should check him out, Dan.
Okay.
Yeah, he's got some good stuff. He does a podcast called Trash Taste,
Mhm.
and it's good stuff. And anyways, but back to Star Wars. What the
Well,
series really makes me miss are Star Wars video games.
Oh yeah.
Like Star Wars video games used to be great, and then they sucked for a long time, and then there were a few good ones, and then they sucked some more.
Do you
Like
remember Rebel Assault for the PC way back in the day? Rebel
I
Assault.
remember that's the only one I play. No, that's not the only one. But I've only played like 3 Star Wars games. That was the first one, and that's like one of my most cherished video
Right.
games from
You're an adventurer as a pilot and
child-
as a foot soldier guy, basically. Like, and going and N64 had a couple of good ones.
mhm.
I mean, the
Pod
controls
Racers, Pod Racers,
Pod
well,
Racer was
Pod
great.
Racers.
and as much as Shadows of the Empire had atrocious controls, I still played the crap out of that. Like, that's the
I don't
one,
know
like,
which one I played for the N64. There was a pretty bad, I would say, Star Wars movie for the Star Wars game for the N64 that I played, and I loved it, but it was kind of
yeah.
it wasn't
I
that
just
good.
remember I'm pretty sure I got the name right. Was it Shadows of the Empire, where you play as Dash Rendar, who's like an associate of Han Solo? Like,
So I haven't played that one. The only Star Wars games I've played are Knights of the Old Republic,
great game.
Pod Racers, Star Wars.
The
Hang on,
racer game.
I've got a physical box of it.
The one I remember the one I'm talking about is the one that the coolest thing about the game was the first level that you replay the Battle of Hoth. I think it's called like.
I think that's Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah, that you have to
Yeah, you use the
fly
the
around the legs of the huge robots.
Yeah, because there was Rogue Squadron, and then there was Shadows of the Empire for the N64. Shadows of
And
the
the
Empire.
rest of the game wasn't all that great, but that first level was amazing.
Yeah,
I mean, the game technically had a lot of problems.
Yeah, I remember it had a lot of problems. If it's the same game.
But I still played all the way through it just because. I mean, you at one point you fight IG-88, and then later you actually fight Boba Fett. You fight Slave One, and then you fight Boba Fett outside of Slave One. I mean, it's.
Star Wars Republic Commando was another one I've played.
Yeah.
That one was fantastic, and Battlefront 2.
Yeah, I'm still looking at monitoring sales for Jedi Fallen Order. I've heard a lot of good things about that.
I've heard mixed things, honestly.
Oh, really?
I've heard it's like baby's first Dark Souls, and I've heard a lot of the side quests suck because all you do is chase down like different colored ponchos.
Oh.
But I
Well,
mean,
that's
you get
why
a
I
good
won't
deal
pay
for
more
it.
than 20 for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think 20 is a fair price.
But you were saying that Squadrons. Have you played that one, Ian? Because you said that one looks really good. Or maybe you
Squadron, I haven't played it yet, but it looks sick as hell because you play as
I agree.
like it's all like dogfights and like space combat.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people. This is one you can play in VR, right?
Yeah,
I've heard a lot of people are just spend a lot of time doing barrel rolls, running into big starships.
I mean, it came out this year, and it's already down to $40. So if I can catch it on sale for like 20 or 30, I might just throw down the cash for it.
Yeah,
might throw down those eddies.
Yeah, for $20, I mean that would be a good game.
but you do bring up a good point that like what the Mandalorian has done really well is bring about like some of the same stuff we feel when we get to just spend more time within Star Wars. That's what having an extended show does for you rather than, this, an hour and a half in a movie theater. And now the technology is there now. I mean, they pretty much have invented a new technology to make things just look so good. I mean, this episode, like in particular, I mean, just the scenes where they're dropping the TIE fighters out, like the details they had.
This show looks as good as the movies, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the show looks absolutely impeccable, and I don't know what the production cost is per episode, but
shit mode.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But it makes me excited for
and look,
the
the
new
directors.
movies.
the directors, sorry, Ian, but the directors are really good as well. Actually,
Yeah, praise John Favreau.
Yeah.
yeah,
Like God praise
and,
him. He really
And
cares about the
Dave
series.
Filoni. I would say Dave Filoni as well, executive producer. This guy has been in
yeah,
charge of Clone Wars, Rebels. He knows how to deliver on.
and he's a mega Star Wars nerd. I know that because I watched. I don't know if you guys have watched it, but on Disney Plus you can watch. They have some sort of like making Star Wars show. I don't remember the exact name, but I started watching it. It's really interesting, and each episode they talk about a certain aspect of making the Mandalorian. And I haven't finished watching it, but I watched a couple episodes, and it's really interesting. And the first episode, I think, it's basically they interview the directors, or the directors are talking about the episodes that they directed, and they're really good directors. It's the one of those guys is he was nominated for the Oscar not so long ago, Waiki Takiki or something like
Taika
that.
Waititi, yep, New Zealand
Exactly.
director, brilliant.
Mhm.
Every movie of his is worth watching.
Yeah, he's really good, and he was one of the directors. Bryce Dallas Howard, she's mostly an actress, but she was
She's a
also
better
one of the
director. She's got such a good eye. I mean, she's Ron Howard's daughter, so she's got like the same
exactly.
eye.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but that's yeah, I found that out watching that.
I mean,
that
Robert Rodriguez did the most recent episode before this, where the 2 episodes ago, I think he did that one, and that guy knows action.
they're getting some really good directors with a lot of experience, like people
Yeah.
that work in blockbusters. So, and good movies overall. So the quality, I mean, is definitely there. I mean, the quality of production, the score. Oh, that's another thing that we were talking about in the Indiana Jones podcast. We were
Mhm.
talking about scores, right? Like we don't have cool scores anymore in movies. The Mandalorian, I mean, it's an example of what they should start doing again, because the score, it's not even the traditional Star Wars score. They made a new score for the Mandalorian, and it's so iconic already. And when you watch the show, the score is like, I would say 30% of that show.
Mhm.
It really sets the mood.
Well, the
For me, it's a big
orchestral
part of the show.
or the orchestral part of it is very Star Wars bone, but the rest of it with the horn, I think
Mhm.
it's I don't know what horn they're using, or it's a flute or something. They are really like playing into, just that's part of like giving it its own feel. They definitely have
Yeah,
the
exactly.
atmosphere
It
right
gives it a
with it.
feel, right? A certain feel. That's exactly what I meant.
Yeah. So do we want to talk like story and stuff? Because I feel like there's things that they're hinting at for the future, but stuff that they're still leaving quite mysterious. Like, I feel like as much as I find this book story complete for Din Djarin, there's a lot of his story that's still not on the table yet. Like how, when in the previous episode, his face was recognized by the Imperial like computer, like when he took it off, like he was able to access it with his face. Like that's something that shouldn't be happening unless he was an Imperial at one point. Or like
Oh yeah,
his
that's a
whole
good point.
past is kind of still not in the up in the air. And so I hope that even if becomes a Boba Fett focused season next season, that he's still involved, and clearly the politics of Mandalore are going to come into play here with the dark saber with him and Bo-Katan. Like that's going to be interesting to follow as well. But like there's still some mysteries that are wrapped up in here. Some of it won't be addressed in this show. The Ahsoka and Admiral Thrawn stuff obviously is going to be saved for her show. But there's a lot of lore here that I'm still very curious to see how they get into. And the payoffs they had, I was pretty happy with. But Moff Gideon's not dead.
Right.
So like there's still a lot of like what's up with him.
Yeah,
I mean,
I feel quite conflicted because I did like your idea. Let's make
Yeah.
this about Boba Fett now. So I think that's a brilliant idea. I would like to see that now. I think
Yeah.
I would like to see the next season. I want it to be a Boba Fett idea.
Or at
I mean,
least like the
season.
first episode starts off with they recap how he got to where he is today. Like,
Yeah, but I just want a Boba Fett season now. I don't want to even. I don't even want to see him like the main character anymore. I don't want to see Mando because that's such a. I think that would be really cool. Just we had a great run with Mando, and
yeah.
now we're gonna focus on Boba Fett. I think
Well,
that would be perfect.
you could still have characters be through lines. I feel like nobody has quite figured out and done this right yet, where when a character's story arc is complete, you can still have the show and continue because the story. So there's micro and macro level storytelling. And most stories are micro level because you have a protagonist you follow through to the end. And when that's over, the show would be over. The movie is over. But certain storytellers, like George R. R. Martin with Game of Thrones, the story is the world. And really, Star Wars' story is the world. We've been focused on the Skywalker family. But this is a true chance potentially to have some macro storytelling really be the through line here. Certain shows were supposed to be that way and then weren't. Heroes is a particular example. They were almost supposed to have 90% new cast every
That
season.
makes me want to throw up, though. Don't mention that show.
But I'm using it as an example as a show that they then started holding their characters as they were a crutch. They were so popular at that first season, they didn't go through with the idea of like, you basically have a whole new cast the next season. Maybe Siler and whatever or the company have some through line characters that still are on.
Man,
But like,
just mentioning that show, I remember Heroes, and oh man.
But that's, again, it's a failure, I feel, of being able to understand how to tell a story on a macro level. Now, granted, it's hard to do. People fall in love with characters and want to continue watching those characters. So you have to be really good at introducing multiple characters that have compelling stories. I'm going to be very curious if they go this way. This is a true attempt at something Game of Thrones level, in terms of a story where the main character is the world and not any one.
Or Marvel, the Marvel universe as well. That's what they're doing, right? I mean, they're telling. It's not about one of the heroes.
Well, up until Endgame, this was truly Tony Stark's story.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point, Dan, that I've never really considered that Star Wars focuses on telling stories revolving around a character as opposed to juggling multiple story arcs a la Game of Thrones. And I guess it makes me wonder if a series could exist with success in that format.
Yeah, it's very hard. There's a reason why like probably 90% of fiction media is told on a micro level, because the idea is you have your protagonist and he is the person that, or he or she or whoever are like, that's your focus and this is the draw to the story. But Game of Thrones, the draw is the world, and really we're drawn to Star Wars, yes, through Luke Skywalker and his story and Darth Vader, but at some point we do need to move beyond that. And the Star Wars is such an encompassing universe of story that there is a way to do that. And I feel like if they go this route, I'm in regardless, because I do like the characters we've had so far. But this really excites me if they're going to try to go there. And I feel like Pedro Pascal and Katie Sackhoff are still going to recur. I mean, the Mandalore politics are going to have to come
I would
back.
rather him not appear anymore, because I think that was a great run. I really like your idea now. Like, I wanted to see what happened next with him, but now I don't, because I think, it's perfect ending, right? I mean,
well, it could still tie
perfect.
together. It could still tie together eventually, because eventually we're going to maybe see the try to reformation of Mandalore. And so you could bring everybody back if they get to the point where we've had like multiple books of different Mandalorian characters and their adventures, and then it ties together in a massive final season about Mandalore.
Yeah, Mendo can appear again, but as a supporting character.
Yeah,
They should.
yeah,
I'm definitely on board with. I don't want a different show. The book of
yeah.
Boba Fett. Like I want that should be the show. That should be the Mandalorian. Because if not, also it's a little bit repetitive.
Hmm.
You have the Mandalorian show, then
Yeah.
you have the Boba Fett, which is basically Mandalorian side B. I mean it's too much.
Avatar, macro storytelling,
Yeah,
because they move on to different. They have the story is the world. Now we all love Aang, we love Korra in different ways. Like there's different main character
Yeah, they're
arcs,
both
but
equally good in different
yeah.
ways. Yeah.
And so there's ways of telling stories within a fascinating world without having to always revert to the same crutch characters. As much as we love them. I mean, again, I got shivers seeing Luke show up in this episode. But
Yeah,
again,
but we
it was
don't
a
want a
scene.
Luke Skywalker show. Yeah, it's cool when he appears for
Yeah.
one scene. We've already had a lot of Luke Skywalker, a whole
Yeah.
trilogy about Luke Skywalker. So
Yeah.
that's
Obi-Wan Kenobi shows up in one episode of Star Wars Rebels. And
Mhm.
it's one of the best scenes. I won't spoil it because like it's you'll
I'll watch it.
yeah. It's you don't need it as a crutch, like in Rogue One, even as a movie, they can bring that. Like you had those scenes with Darth Vader that it's stuff can add while still doing a lot more. And so I'm excited on the idea of it. If they doesn't deliver on it, I'll be probably disappointed. But like I've long given up the idea of being upset because I didn't get the show I wanted or the movie I wanted or expected, because
Sure.
that's a toxic impulse as well.
Well, I think
I
that's what makes you like a good Star Wars fan, if you will. Because I have friends that are Star Wars fans and simply hate the series because they're like, oh well, Grogu's just minions for Star Wars fans. I'm like, okay, I guess if you want to be that way, it's like you're never gonna enjoy Star Wars again.
I mean, did they not enjoy did they hate the Ewoks so badly that they just stopped Star Wars? I mean, the Ewoks were, if you want to look at them objectively, were of the same vein.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, yeah, it's the same emotion. It squeezes the same pleasure center of the brain. But people don't want to hear that because once you take off the nostalgia glasses, you can't put them back on.
Yeah.
Well, the great thing about the Mandalorian is that it's and this is a little bit redundant and obvious, but it's a great show. It's a great adventure show, and
Mm.
it's genuinely good, and that's why it has gotten people excited. The problem with the movies, this to me has redeemed Disney's take on Star Wars, because after 5 movies, it was very disappointing where Disney was taking this thing. And the problem with the movies is that they're just not good.
I kind of wish this had come out before the sequel movies, but maybe because this has had more time to marinate. The movies came out probably too fast. They really wanted the return on.
I don't know if those movies were ever going to be good, man. I mean,
Well,
they're so.
The problem again, it's a problem of direction. When you decide that you're going to have 3 different directors do 3 different takes on a movie from the get-go, and you don't write a trilogy from the start, it's. I mean, at one point they were, but Michael Arndt, who they had hired to write the scripts, said he needed another year, and then they were like, no. So they brought in J.J. Abrams to rewrite it.
Yeah,
I have my own feelings on J.J. Abrams in general. That
I don't know. I don't know, like what could have been done to save those. I mean, those movies are frankly like really bad.
I mean, we can go back
and
to
the,
our discussion before the podcast about, Cyberpunk. I'm like, again, just don't get and release something if it's not been planned and done right in advance. I mean, again, this is something that would have helped if they had just written 3 movies. I mean, very clearly, and particularly J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson had different conclusions drawn from the same first script, and that was a problem. Like, let somebody write 3 movies. And I mean, in my opinion, I would personally just leave J.J. Abrams out of these kind of things because he never knows how to finish what he starts.
yeah,
I mean,
but
go ahead.
no, but I mean, look, regardless, I mean, yeah, I mean, you make, yeah, that's definitely true. But I mean, the fact remains, the movie sucked. You know, that was a big problem. That was the biggest problem with the movies. They really sucked. So I think the Mandalorian's like, oh no, we can actually have good Star Wars stuff again, which is a big relief. And it's a great starting point for what they're now doing, which is like they're launching the cinematic universe. I mean, sorry, this what should we call it? The streaming universe,
Yeah.
because it's not technically TV, but this we're gonna have the streaming universe of Star Wars, which instead of movies, we're gonna have shows, but it's really like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? They're all set in this universe, but I hope they all stand on their own. They
Yeah.
they tell their own story, which is why the Mandalorian is good. Because you don't have to watch other stuff. Like I hope the other shows are not like that you don't even understand it, or they don't make sense without they should really stand on their own, and I'm hoping that will happen, and that they will have a similar level of cohesiveness and quality, and make people excited about the world like the Mandalorian has.
Well, let's talk about why, like, what are differences between this and what the sequels had attempted to do that maybe the benefit of extra time and planning helped it. And one of which is the movies, at least starting from The Force Awakens, threw a whole bunch of random lore at you that they had no idea how they were going to finish. Whereas this told a concentrated story with a planned idea. Like there very clearly a sense of where this show was going to go, and they went with it, And so you still had your surprises, your fan service, and you had stuff like, that pleased all audiences. But I would say that this show benefits a lot by not trying to just throw out as many cool things as you think people want to see, but I was a little worried for season 2 when they were like, Ahsoka Tano is going to be in it. You're going to have Bo-Katan. You're going to have all these things riding in season 2, but they smartly had an editor's hand to it and said, you only need to do so much. You don't need to overdo it. And so it's a much more careful approach to it. And I think that that's what this did better than the sequels did. Although I will be curious to see how people feel about the movies given another 10 years or so. Empire Strikes Back had a notoriously mixed to negative response when it first came out.
So I'm going to throw a real controversial opinion down, and that is that the Star Wars franchise uses the movies as a backbone and then builds from there. So you can think of the movies as a central nervous system, and then regardless, everything that branches off from that is like the stuff that people really enjoy. Like if you ask a hardcore Star Wars fan, like what's your single most favorite piece of Star Wars like story? And I think more often than not, it's going to be like an offshoot or like some degree of spin-off. A lot of people will say it'll be like one of the Star Wars video games, or a lot of the times people will point at like comics and Star Wars series. So I think the movies are designed to be general enough that they can just set up for a lot of production, and they can plant those seeds of lore.
So Ian, what's your favorite then piece of Star Wars?
See, that's such a tough question.
Yeah. But you presented it based on like, this is a question that has to be asked.
So I guess like my single favorite piece of like Star Wars, I really love the prequels era in the Star Wars historical chart, like the timeline of the galactic history. Like as the prequels and like the Clone Wars take place, that's my favorite era, if you will. And I people always think it's a huge troll answer, but I really love episode 1 because it sets up for like so much. Like you can't enjoy the Clone Wars without understanding episode 1. Episode 1 has like all of those callbacks to the original series. That. You do?
Yeah, I mean, it's not my favorite, but I never understood why people didn't like Episode 1. I think it was a great movie. I mean, if you tell me you don't like Jar Jar Binks, that's one thing, and that's very
See, I love
legitimate.
Jar Jar Binks because
Okay, yeah,
he's
but
so triggering for so many people, and he makes like the series fun to talk about.
Yeah, well, yeah, I agree with that, 100%.
I would say I'm not a
So-
fan of him or the fact that we are introduced to Anakin as a kid. Chosen One storylines are not my favorite, just in general, but that's just I feel like they've worked only in certain instances. You know, we talk about the Matrix and like, you know, and so
I mean, I'm not saying
that's
the
just a
movie is
personal
perfect, right?
view
I'm
of
just
how.
saying that I don't understand why people like people. I don't think people say that anymore. Really, I think at this point people are like Episode 1. That was like a really cool movie, you know, because now they compare it to the sequels. But for a long time, yeah, people used to say, "Oh yeah, Episode 1, that's the bad one." You know, I don't
Yeah,
think
I
a lot
mean,
of people say that anymore.
Actually, it used to be people would say Episode 2 was the bad one, from what
Or
I
Episode 2, but I heard Episode 1 a lot more. But Episode 2,
two.
I would say the same thing. I don't understand. I think it's a great movie, and it has Natalie Portman at her peak in it. So
and that's
I,
your requirement for a quality Star Wars movie is how hot Natalie Portman is.
Yeah,
well, that's a huge bonus. That's like you know, like you get a good movie, but then you get Natalie Portman. That's like twice as good. So
Yeah, I mean, Natalie Portman was definitely a teenage crush for me, growing up on the prequels.
for every teenager at that time, I think.
But I guess that kind of proves my point that a lot of the new trilogy, 7, 8, and 9, I think are doing a lot to set up for what the franchise will look like 10 years down the line.
yeah. I feel like this trilogy in particular was meant to be that, and maybe that was another problem they had, is they had a guiding hand that like we need to set these kind of things up. But to go back to the question that I asked, I would say that my favorite piece of Star Wars is actually Star Wars Rebels, particularly
Okay.
season 2 on. It has an element to it that like that's when I liked Clone Wars enough, but that's when I really was sold on me. I think I prefer mostly Star Wars in the TV format, and I've been excited for where they go from there.
So Rebels,
Yeah.
Star Wars Rebels. And I'm sorry, yours was Ian. Was it Episode 1 or the other thing?
Well, it's episode 1, but only because episode 1 is like the core dependency for the Clone Wars, for Clone Wars, the 2003 micro series,
Yeah.
which I think like if I wanted to really be a Star Wars hipster, that's my single favorite piece of Star Wars.
The Gennady Tartakovsky produced.
Yeah, like the Samurai Jack style.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
that was done very well.
Yeah, it's
What-
done
what
so
was?
well. So, in order to promote Star Wars Episode 2, Cartoon Network commissioned a micro series that they aired as like 1-minute commercials on Cartoon Network. And did you ever see Samurai Jack as a kid, Bruno?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was done by the same studio and the same artist. So it's like in that style, but it's Star Wars and it's Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. Like,
Oh, I think I've seen it. Yeah,
Yeah,
long
And
time.
I think
ago.
actually this was
I remember it.
preparing for Episode 3 because this was taking place during the Clone Wars.
right.
So,
Yeah, but it's like
Oh,
a
I-
spin-off of the Clone Wars.
yeah.
And that's like my single favorite piece of like Star Wars media.
Yeah, and like it was like, and then there was like what was great. I mean, they gave Anakin a nemesis. In that, what was her name? Savage Ventress, I think.
Yeah, the bald chick.
Yeah, and so
the
having,
Sith.
yeah, and so again, part of what makes a compelling story is having that narrative. You know, you have that antagonist, and honestly, though that series and the Clone Wars series that followed did more than the movies did to sort of give us that central pull. And so again, this is maybe goes back to what George Lucas has always felt, is that TV is the best format for this. There's just too much to do. The original trilogy is the only one that maybe operated outside of the idea that there was more that they wanted to show.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as like lore building, I think like each medium has its strengths and weaknesses, and I think the movies do a good job of like setting precedent. I
Mhm.
think TV shows do a good job of rewarding your investment into the series, and I think comics do a good job of like comics and like the novels do a really good job of like deep dives, like really diving in to hitting like the lowest levels of the lore.
Well, I'm my personal favorite thing about Star Wars is a lot more boring than yours because it's the original trilogy. I mean, for me,
Mhm.
that's what made me a Star Wars fan, and it's what I still like the best. My second thing would be the prequel trilogy, which I actually really enjoyed, and that was my Star Wars growing up. That's I grew up going to see the prequels in the theaters, and that was the that was the Star Wars for our generation. I feel like,
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
uh,
we had the VHS of the original, and then my brother came and signed me out
exactly.
of middle school. He came to my middle school, signed me out of class to go watch Phantom Menace because he had
Hmm.
gone and seen the midnight
Wow.
show, and he signed on my excuse sheet because you got to put an excuse down
Yeah.
here, Star Wars, and I
Star
didn't get it,
Wars.
and I didn't get a truancy or anything. Like,
It's a legitimate excuse. It's a
right?
very
I mean, it shows you that like there was no administrator reading that shit.
Yeah.
To be like, what
Well,
do you mean he didn't have a dentist appointment?
well, I even had one teacher who I legit just told us what we were doing, and she's just like, just sort of like bumps her. This is growing up in
and dude,
Missouri, so she had her Green Bay Packers mug that she had rebuilt that she just bumped me with that and be like, enjoy.
Nice.
and that's a great story. Unfortunately, imagine like the kids growing up today, if they try to say the same thing. Yeah, my brother took me to see The Force Awakens. I mean, it's really not the same thing.
I mean,
Uh,
I
I
can
think
tell
it
you right
is.
now, my nieces and nephews love them.
Yeah.
So like,
So
okay,
I
so
think I
I
think you
got
bring up
some
like a
people
really
like
good
them.
point. Like my girlfriend's nephews are really into Star Wars, but all of the Star Wars media they consume are like it's merchandise and like uh cardboard cover like children's books that are like incredibly watered down versions of the new series.
yeah,
So, like I said, I don't think 7, 8, and 9 are meant for us. They're meant for the Zoomers and the generation that's going to come after that.
I can tell you if you give out candy on Halloween back when we still did that, every gaggle of kids had a Ray. Like,
Yeah, it's Kylo Ren and Rey are the new costumes. Like, it
yeah,
doesn't matter how much you dislike the movies, and it doesn't matter how much they suck now. Like, they will be taken to heart by the generation, like by the kids now.
and
So that,
time will change how people feel about movies. Again,
oh,
Empire Strikes
absolutely.
Back had a
I'm
very mixed.
surprised. I'm kind of surprised that kids actually liked it. It's hard for me to understand that. But if that's
I
the
mean,
case,
it's
then I mean,
because you're
sure,
a jaded, depressed adult. Like everything
that's
was better when you were a kid. Were you paying bills when you were a
I'm sure.
child? No,
I'm
which
sure.
made
Yeah. I
everything
mean,
in
it
life
was a lot.
better.
It was a lot nicer. Yeah.
I mean, again, I
Like,
go back to the fact that Empire Strikes Back, widely viewed as the greatest Star Wars movie critically now,
yeah,
like had a very mixed reaction before. Like that movie is sad when you like the heroes lose.
Yeah,
You
but it's
know,
different. I feel that it's I mean, when you watch The Empire Strikes Back today, I mean, it's
but
a
that's what I
fantastic
mean. We
movie.
watch it today with a new view, with like different eyes. People back then were like it took a while for people to come around on that. Like,
Well,
imagine
I
if that
think
movie ended the way Harrison Ford actually wanted and Han Solo died, like instead of being frozen in carbonite. Like that movie was going dark, and you
well,
know,
you have a point. I think that movie is nicer now because we know that we're gonna get the Return of
Return
the
of the
Jedi.
Jedi.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's like, well, okay, we can deal with this. We can deal
yeah.
with you
Like,
know.
trust me. Have you sat a little kid down to watch the trilogy,
No,
and that don't know anything? And
just myself. I
yeah,
was a kid when I watched the trilogy.
right. But like now, look at it in the eyes of a kid, and those scenes toward the end of Empire Strikes Back. Like I've seen my niece and nephews like look at that, like they're like shocked. at what's going on. And then and then right away at the end, they have to know, hey, does it get better? And then like, oh, we'll watch the next one right now. Like,
Yeah, they didn't
but
have to wait years in between.
yeah. And so like, I think like it'll be interesting to see the view on the sequels. I mean, I think in particular the way they ended it might never age well, but there's going to be elements within it that I think people will look on differently over time.
Maybe. I'm not as optimistic as you are, but I think that if they were able to make a show like The Mandalorian, and if you give it to the right person, so I think this is the approach now. You got to do it like The Mandalorian. You got to give it to people that love Star Wars, like those guys that made The Mandalorian. Especially, you guys should really watch that making of The Mandalorian show on Disney Plus, because you understand. Like that's how I understood how The Mandalorian turned out to be good. It's because they gave it to people that really love Star Wars, and they have, like you said, Dan. They had a plan, and they
Well,
had a guy in charge. They had a Napoleon.
well,
Napoleon
Dave
used to say
Filoni
that
is so
one
close
of
to
his
George Lucas.
most famous saying was that it was better to have one bad general than two good generals.
Yeah.
Because if you have two generals, they'll just fight each other, and there isn't a cohesive plan, right? Cohesive
Right.
plan of action. So you gotta have someone in charge, and that person needs to be someone who loves Star Wars and loves the world.
So to counter that is J.J. Abrams is a giant Star Wars fan. His Star Trek movies are very almost Star Wars inspired in terms of how action oriented they are.
Yeah, but I guess it needs to be done right.
It needs to be someone who's good at actually.
Exactly.
Honestly, I think J.J. Abrams' storyline works better for Mission Impossible style stuff, where where everything is plot based, not scene based and character based. I think people come to Star Wars for the characters. They don't come for convoluted plot, and like we want to see the people we like do things. We don't want to see
yeah, and that's absolutely true. And I think that I agree with that. And I would add to that there's no heart, in those movies. That's a big problem. There's no character development, and there's no heart, like The Mandalorian.
In the new series?
Yeah.
I'm talking about the new movie series.
Sure.
The new movie.
So for future reference, what do we formally call that as a Star Wars community?
This is the sequel trilogy.
The sequels?
Yeah.
The ones we don't talk about, maybe? No, the sequel trilogy, I guess, yeah. Because we have the prequels, now we have the sequels.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that they're going to make more sequels, I imagine. But
yeah.
Well, the first movie that's going to be made is actually going to be a Rogue Squadron movie, they announced. And we don't know what Rian Johnson's trilogy is going to be about. The rumor is still that it's an Old Republic trilogy that he's going to be doing.
I think that'd be sick because I love Knights of the Old Republic.
Right. And I feel like Rian Johnson is a guy.
Wars game.
I think Rian Johnson is a guy that you just give him a sandbox in something that he can do a little bit more on his own do a whole trilogy on his own, because the guy is a gifted writer. It's just they had him come in to do the middle movie in between two J.J. Abrams flicks. It's like, that was weird.
And maybe we shouldn't really do trilogies anymore, maybe because one movie is enough. You make a good movie. I
think that's going to be a non thing. I think as far as core Star Wars, you're always going to have them come out in trilogies.
Yeah.
But the spin-offs like Rogue One and Solo, I don't know how you felt about those, Bruno.
I didn't like Rogue One, and I thought Solo was pretty underwhelming. Again, I mean, The Mandalorian I like because it has heart, and I care about the characters. I care about the score. The score is super cool. I mean, it makes you feel like you're in an adventure. It's an action adventure, sci-fi, world that you wanna experience. And I mean, those movies were a little bit boring. I mean, they're okay, but I mean, did you really care about the characters in Rogue One and Solo?
Well,
I mean,
Yeah,
eh,
I did.
Rogue One was
okay. I
also
mean,
very much cut apart and put back together a little too much. Um, I did like a lot of the characters they put in it, but I feel like there were elements within that definitely it was overproduced at the end as they were worried about it not being good. I still liked most of it, but there were clearly elements that they were working on there that they didn't fully realize. Like the Forrest Whitaker character, I feel like was supposed to be a Darth, like a good person, a good guy with a Darth Vader sort of element because he's mostly machine as well. And if you're gonna include both in a movie, I feel like there should have maybe been a better payoff for that. And so there were a lot of elements that were clearly cut and paste around, but I felt it was overall a successful movie.
okay. Yeah, and I look, if people like the movies, I mean that's good. I mean that's good for I watched all 5 movies in the theaters.
Mhm.
Did I like them? No, I didn't really like them. But I certainly like Rogue One and Solo a lot better than the sequel trilogy. But I The Mandalorian, to me at least, I mean it felt right.
And again, I
The
just think we've had more
movie
time
not
to
so
develop
much.
The Mandalorian. We've had more time. Those movies, like the sequels, Rogue One and Solo, like they
Yeah,
were
the
like that
development cycle
production.
was super short for everyone.
Yeah, that
Everyone.
production was on rails for all that stuff. They were trying to push that out so fast. I
Yeah,
mean, they paid what, 4 billion for Star
uh-huh.
Wars.
They
So
they bought the thing and they decided, okay, in 2 years from now we're gonna have the first movie, and then there's gonna be a movie every year after that. So
yeah,
okay, you have to produce them, and that's exactly what the movies felt like. They felt like they were, a factory product. They felt
yeah,
corporate. They,
they
they
needed to
felt like a
wait maybe
product.
1 to 2 more years. Like this needed to be worked on and planned, and maybe we would have gotten like a more. I mean, honestly, like for a trilogy, you need to write 3 movies off the bat. Like, the reason why the Lord of the Rings works so well is that script is there. It writes itself.
Yeah,
It's
and there
there.
was no time for that. There was no time to work on a trilogy. If you're going to do a trilogy, I mean, that's a big undertaking. I mean,
Yeah.
they didn't take the time because they couldn't. I mean, they paid $4 billion for the thing, and they wanted to make their money back. But
I mean, they pretty much
uh,
made it back after the first movie, I think.
exactly, so maybe they shouldn't have rushed it that much because
I
it
mean,
wasn't really
for
necessary.
shareholders, they're probably like, this worked. For fans, you know, we got the Mandalorian
Yeah,
now, and we'll see where they go from there. But
yeah. I
I'm a
mean,
little more confident going
I
forward
agree.
because we're having more time to digest and marinate these ideas that they have. And it's like we said, we're excited to see where this goes because we like the characters, but we also see where the other avenues they're going on. I'm excited for an Ahsoka series. I'm very curious if they're going to bring Grand Admiral Thrawn into that, like how they're going to do him. That's a character that's pretty hard to do on screen without CGI because he's like 7 feet tall or something, and like big alien, like he's blue skin. I mean, blue skin you can do. I mean, but like you know, be crazy if they got Mads Mikkelsen for that because well, he's doing a lot of stuff now, but like his brother, I think, did the voice for him in Rebels. So um,
So yeah, so we're I think we should probably end it soon
yeah,
because we've been talking for a while. But do you guys want to talk about any other things about the Mandalorian specifically? So um, like something that maybe we can talk about the one thing that we really liked about the show and what we want to see in season 3, maybe, or just one of those things.
I mean, I think the series does everything very well, and I'm excited to see more of it. I think it's really it's the stride that fans want out of the Star Wars series right now.
mhm. I think my favorite takeaway from the Mandalorian series is honestly, I'm just excited to see more Mandalorian stories, whether it be focused on Boba Fett or Din Djarin with Bo-Katan trying to recruit more Mandalorians throughout the galaxy, or however they do it. I'm all in on focusing and giving more time to breathe on the different factions of Mandalorians. I feel like they've really they've touched on it in cartoons, and they've given it more life within this series.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, personally, I really like the Monster of the Week structure. I felt that that was something different, but it also had like that story that it was a story that went on for 2 seasons. And I'm really hoping that they will do what you said, Dan. I mean, I'm really hoping that they'll do the book of Boba Fett now.
Yeah,
And
I've been waiting for somebody to fulfill this kind of promise on a show that again, I use Heroes as the example where they failed to do it, and we see how that turned out. Turned out bad. Like when they decided not to do what could
but
be.
I don't think the Mandalorian can be like Heroes. I mean, it's just this
Well,
is a good show. That
what I
show
mean by
was
that is playing a character out far beyond his character arc. I feel I want to see someone be confident enough to say our character arc is over. We can move on to someone else who we haven't dealt with them as much anymore. Ensemble shows can pull it off a little bit more easily, or ensemble novels like Game of Thrones. But macro storytelling is something I personally want to see more of because it's exciting, because that means you can make a show go on for a long time and then not get stale. Characters, eventually we get bored and we don't need to see the same thing. Character, and it also ruins it. The Walking Dead is another example where like some characters just like that's the perfect show that you should be able to cycle through main characters very easily and come and go, and they didn't fulfill on that either.
Yeah, The Walking Dead is even sadder than Heroes, because that was actually a good show that turned sour.
Right. This is the opportunity to tell stories without getting stale and not relying on certain characters and actors as a crutch. I mean, maybe in a way this is built in to the story because we don't actually see much of Pedro Pascal for 2 seasons. So it's a little bit easier to do without his performance, which is a bit of a shame. I do like him as an actor. I know, Bruno, you and I disagree a bit on that, but
What do you mean?
I thought you don't like Pedro Pascal that much.
Well, no, I said the opposite. I said that I really liked him.
Okay, never mind then. Corrected, but like again, this is
no. I loved him in Narcos. Weren't we talking? Well, when were we?
I think you didn't.
That?
I think you didn't like him in Game of Thrones.
Oh no, it's not that I didn't like him. It's just that I think he only appeared for one episode, right?
I mean, he was there for a season. He was there for pretty much all
whole season.
Yeah.
In Game of Thrones, yeah, he had a season, like one or two.
But he wasn't like, I didn't really like him in Game of Thrones. I remember him from the books. That character is like super cool in the books.
Yeah.
And in the show, I didn't.
That was maybe part of the problem of them having to split up book 3 into 2 seasons, but that's neither here nor there. But I feel like the Mandalorians in general, because of the helmets and because the show isn't on a crutch of the actors they have either. And so, we don't have to, while it's hard to pull off compelling characters sometimes without facial expressions, like maybe this is an easier opportunity for them to do so.
Yeah.
Power
even
Rangers
though,
sorry.
Even though sorry.
I was joking. I just saw that. I was reminded of my Power Ranger helmet back there. Power Ranger is the only show that can continue going on with a new cast every year.
Oh yeah, but I mean, I Pedro Pascal though, his voice is really good. I mean, and it's not the same as a face, but I mean, I think he was great in the show.
I'll watch him next week as the villain in Wonder Woman.
And I'm super. We're gonna do a podcast on that movie, and I'm super excited for that. I mean, I really like the first movie, so and especially because this is definitely the big thing. This is gonna be the first movie that is gonna come out on HBO Max, and it's also gonna be the first real movie that we get in I don't know how many months.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, that's ultimately though my takeaway is that I'm in for however they do it. I really, really hope it's the book of Boba Fett, and we get that. and we get that for season 2, 3, maybe even season 4, even if it's just one season, and then we can go to Bo-Katan, and then we can go to whoever else they want to rope into this. There's actually a character
Baby
from
Yoda. Maybe Baby Yoda should have a book, when he's already trained.
yeah, when he becomes, because he's not gonna, unless he's slaughtered by Kylo Ren as one of the acolytes.
The book of Grogu.
Yeah, because I still like the idea of it finishing up with him being the Mandalorian. But there's also another Mandalorian from Rebels whose character is Sabine, who would be another character who they could rope into this show as well. And you can have like 4 or 5 main Mandalorian characters that get books throughout this.
Well, Grogu could be like not a Mandalorian, but he could be sort of a hero, like they could come up with a really cool storyline for him as
you telling me Disney isn't salivating at the thought of a Grogu sized Mandalorian armor toy? Like,
yeah, I mean that alone would sell merch.
Yeah.
The problem with Grogu is that if he's anything like Yoda, he doesn't really look that imposing,
Hey, the most maligned Star Wars movie, Attack of the Clones, had jumping around with Yoda with the lightsaber, and
yeah, and he was in Soul Calibur 3,
right?
Which I liked. Which
was and he had a distinct advantage in that because he was short, and thus a lot of moves went over him.
The problem with that is that that works for one scene, at least for me, it worked. But a whole season, it must.
I think what it'll be, it could be an end of the show stinger. That would be like you see him put the armor on and fly off.
Yeah, just some. Yeah, I think that would work better.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm glad. I'm like these takeaways. This was a fun one.
Super powered Grogu. Oh, yeah. That would be cool. All right, so thanks for watching the podcast. Any final remarks, guys? Before I
think I got them all in.
Yep.
All right. Thanks.